My name is Ed Fang, host of the Football Analytics Show. This week's episode is devoted to home and rest advantage in football, both the NFL and college football. This was work that I did a couple years ago, and this episode was actually recorded in August of 2022. While the premium part of the podcast that this was made for no longer exists, the concepts in this episode still hold true. At the end of the episode, I will give you the most up-to-date numbers on home and rest advantage in football. Betting on football is hard. You should want every possible edge in your quantitative predictions. At least those edges with some statistical certainty. In this supporters-only episode of the Football Analytics Show, I'll look at a team's advantage based on home field and rest. The former leads to some really nice results that we can have confidence in. The latter is a little bit more difficult. Let me explain. To start out, let's look at home field advantage over a wide sample of years. And the first thing that sticks out is how this parameter has changed over the years. Let's take the NFL as an example. Let's first look at the decade from 2002 to 2011. We'll look at all regular season games, and during this period, we find that the home team wins on average by 2.6 points. So already we can put to bed this idea that home field is 3 points in football. It hasn't been 3 points for over 2 decades. However, this home field advantage, or the average margin of victory for home teams in regular season NFL games, has changed. If we look at the next 5-year period, so that would be 2012 through 2016, the home field advantage was 2.4 points, a slight decrease from the 2.6 points of the previous decade. If we look over the last 4 seasons with fans, so that would be 2017 through 2021, I'm not counting the 2020 season in which there were no fans. During this 4-year period, home field advantage in the NFL was 1.6 points. In college football, the concept has been the same. For reasons that I'll get into a little bit later, I'm only going to look at conference games, and I'm only going to look at FBS versus FBS games. So, from 2012 to 2017, this is a 6-year period. The home advantage was 2.6 points. So the home team in conference games and FBS versus FBS games won on average by 2.6 points. If we look at the last 3 seasons with fans, that quantity has decreased. The home advantage is 2.2 points. I don't want to make a big deal about the magnitude of the decrease. And I also don't really want to comment too much about whether there's been more of a decrease over the last 3 or 4 seasons or whether COVID has played a role. And the reason why is we got to talk about the error in these estimates. So whenever we're going to make an estimate of home field advantage or the advantage due to rest from a bye week, there's always going to be some uncertainty in that estimate. And this uncertainty is encapsulated by the error. So, when you look at the last 3 seasons with fans in college football, the error is about 0.5 point. So, remember, the home team on average wins by 2.2 points in these games. An error of 0.5 point simply means that we're about 2 and 3 certain that the estimate is within 0.5 point of that home advantage estimate. Okay, so that means there's about a 2 and 3 probability that the true home field advantage is between 1.7 points and 2.7 points. This error is going to decrease with more games in your sample size. And for this last 3 years in college football, there were 1,540 conference games in the sample. The overall trend in home field advantage has been decreasing over the years. We see this in other sports as well, in particular the NBA. Most likely, this is due to better travel conditions for the road team as more money pours into these leagues. Teams invested in making it easier to travel. So, take home point number one from this podcast episode: home field advantage is decreasing. Let's break down home field advantage even further. And let's start with the NFL and look at what this quantity is in division games versus out of division games. The idea here is that teams should be more familiar with opponents in their own division. You play that team twice every year. You are making that road trip every single year. There's a sense of the familiar when you're playing a division opponent. I'm going to look at the last 6 seasons with fans. This is the 2015 through 21 season, but I'm going to skip the 2020 COVID year. So this 6-season sample is a balance between two things. One, I want a reasonably large sample size, but two, I want a recent sample size, given that we've seen how home advantage has been decreasing over the years. So the results over this period: in division games, home field advantage is 0.9 points. So it's less than a point and really puts to bed this idea that home field should be 3 points. In out-of-division games, home field advantage is 2.2 points. So home field is significantly more when you're playing out of division. Estimate of home advantage in division should be particularly accurate. This is because teams play in home and home structure, and this naturally accounts for how good the teams are. Let's just consider an example. In 2021, the Buffalo Bills played their division opponent, the New York Jets, twice. And the Bills were one of the best teams in the NFL, and the Jets were one of the worst. When the Bills were at home, they won by 28 points. So if you just look at this single data point, it suggests a massive 28-point home field advantage. Of course, we are not accounting for how much better the Bills are than the Jets. So in essence, we are setting an expectation that the two teams were equal, and then we're estimating the home field based on this one game, based on that the Bills won by 28 points. This is not a good baseline expectations, and we'll talk about that again in the future. When the Bills went to the Jets lost by 17 points. So the road team won by 17 points. So when you look at the home field advantage over these two games, you would add 28 for the margin of victory that the Bills had at home, but you would actually subtract 17 from that because the home team Jets lost by 17 points. So over the two games, you get a net home field advantage of 11 points. This gives you an estimate of 5.5 points. The fact that these two teams play a home-and-home structure naturally accounts for the difference in the strength of teams. In the NFL, home field advantage in division is 0.9 points, and then out of your division, it's 2.2 points. Let's also look at what's going on in college football. I want to calculate what the home field advantage is in conference games. I'm going to do this over the last 6 meaningful seasons with fans in the crowds. So that's going to be 2015 through 21 and skipping over the 2020 COVID year. And I'm not going to include independent schools like Notre Dame, except for the 1 year that they were in the ACC. In conference games, the home team beat the road team on average by 2.4 points. Again, it's significantly lower than the classic value of 3 points. What about out-of-conference games? Well, here, the home team has won by an average of 8.9 points. Whoa, that is way bigger. Clearly, something is going on here. And it doesn't take you too long to figure out what is going on. Better teams tend to host worse teams in college football. We're only looking at FBS versus FBS type games, but you're still getting some very lopsided contests. So for example, last year in 2021, Alabama was a 50-point favorite at home against New Mexico State. Remember, the SEC always likes to have Cupcake Saturday in November, give them a little bit of a break while they're in that tough conference schedule. Alabama won this game by 56 points. These games tend to lead to a higher estimate of home field advantage. More on that later. This is also the reason that I didn't include out-of-conference games earlier when I was making the case that home field advantage decreases over the years. I didn't want to include games in which Alabama was at home and just blowing out much weaker opponents. Take home point number 2. Home field advantage is smaller in division games in the NFL than out-of-division games. Home field advantage is also smaller in conference games in college, but we have yet to completely quantify this. These games with Alabama beating up on smaller opponents is still a problem. For now, let's move on to the advantage from rest. In the NFL, each team gets a bye week. And if a team didn't play the past week, they should have an advantage over a team that did play last week. There should be an advantage due to rest. There should be an advantage coming off of a bye. The idea is that you get a week off to heal little injuries, you get some rest. Of course, there's also the counter argument that maybe when you take a week off, you get a little bit rusty. Maybe a bye week is a little bit of a disadvantage. This rust argument might be more true in college football, as these guys aren't quote-unquote true professionals. They're only kind of professionals. They're not practicing as much as the pros. So to see whether this is true, let's dig into the data. For the NFL, I'm going to look over the last 7 seasons. This is 2015 through 2021. And in each game, we need to set an expectation for what we expect. And this expectation is simply going to be the home advantage based on whether it's a division or out of division games. I'm also including games from the 2020 season. I've simply chosen to take what I'm using for home field advantage, and I'm chopping that in half. So this was the estimate that I used during that season when I was making both NFL and college football predictions. From 2015 through 2021, teams that had a bye playing a team that played last week had an advantage of 0.9 points. So this is fantastic. At some point, I think back on ESPN many years ago, I read that the value for a bye week is about a point, and this 0.9 points is very close to that, so we should be happy with ourselves, and that seems like the right answer, right? Well, not so fast. First of all, the error in this estimate is 0.9 points. So remember, the error quantifies the uncertainty in our estimate. We're never sure about any of these estimates of home field advantage or advantage due to rest. And here, the error is just as large as the actual estimate for the advantage due to rest. This means that there is a 2 in 3 chance that the actual advantage due to rest is somewhere between 0 and 1.8 points. This error is large because the sample size is small. Over this period that I've been telling you about, we have a sample of 216 games. That's not a lot to go on. And in fact, this error estimate says that we're only about 84% sure that the advantage from rest is actually bigger than 0. To further illustrate the problem with the small sample size, let's add another season to the estimate. So let's include the 2014 season. So now we're looking from 2014 to 2021 in the NFL. Now we get a bye advantage of 0.3 points. When we add another year to the sample, we are even less sure that there exists an advantage due to rest, even though we've expanded our sample size to 246 games. Well, this small sample size is really annoying. We actually need to dig further into the data to figure out whether there exists an advantage due to rest. So to do this, actually, let's look at two different time periods. Let's look at the first decade in which I have data. This would be from the 2002 through 2011 season. When we quantify the advantage that a team coming off a bye has when they play a team that played last week, we're actually getting an advantage of 2.5 points over this decade. 2.5 points is significantly more. The error in this estimate is 0.9 points. When we look over the past decade, so that would be 2012 through 2021, the advantage due to rest is 0.7 points. And here the error is 0.8 points. And again, similar to the results that I quoted before, where the actual advantage is very close to the error estimate. We have seen a dramatic decrease in the advantage from a bye week. We were very certain that it existed in the first decade of the century, and we can't be so sure anymore. I have a hypothesis about this. Sports science has gotten much better in football. In the old days, you would have a curmudgeon of a coach that would run his players into the ground. The players would often be tired, so when you got a week off, it really helped. And you can see that from 2002 through 2011, the 2.5 points for a rest advantage was pretty big, and we can be fairly certain that it existed based on the error estimates. That has changed. Sports science has gotten a lot better. Teams use all kinds of technology like heart rate monitors to track what is going on with their players. On an episode of this podcast, Sarah Bailey of the Los Angeles Rams came and talked about how she works to make sure these players are optimized to perform every Sunday. And I think this is the reason why the bye advantage has decreased. What about in college football? Well, let's look at the 2014 through 21 season, and we will look at all FBS versus FBS games. Here we get an advantage of 0.5 point. 0.5 point, not much at all. The error in this estimate over almost 1,000 games is 0.6 points. So again, in college football, we're not completely sure that advantage based on rest actually exists. The college football data is even weirder. If you restrict the sample to only the last 5 seasons, so now we're talking 2017 to 2021, you actually get a negative value, so negative 0.6 points. So you're actually 0.5 point worse when you have a bye and your opponent played last week. So this is take-home point number 3. It is difficult to quantify the advantage from rest due to sample size. We can do one step better in trying to quantify the advantage based on rest. Before, I've talked about the expected result for a game. And what I've used for that expectation is, in the NFL, your home field advantage based on whether you're a division or an out-of-division game. And in essence, what we're doing is we're assuming that the two teams are about the same. And the expectation is simply that home field. However, that's not a particularly good estimation. And we can again go back to 2021 and talk about the Buffalo Bills and the New York Jets. The Bills were significantly better than the Jets, so we should account for this. And I can actually do this with my NFL team rankings. This is the algorithm that got the power rank started over a decade ago. It simply takes margin of victory in games and adjusts for strength of schedule. And it's best to understand this with a simple example. Again, we'll go back to the Bills versus the Jets last year in 2021. The Bills were about 15 points better. Now, when we're talking about this expectation between two teams, we can actually go back and talk about the home field advantage calculation. So there we were essentially setting an expectation in every game that the two teams were equal and then trying to estimate the home field based on that expectation. But that's not a good expectation. So now when we account for the difference in teams, when the Bills actually win at home by 28 points, that's only 13 points better than what we expected based on my NFL team rankings. So that would mean 13 points for home field advantage instead of the 28 points if we assume that both teams were equal. When the Jets lose by 17 at home, well, that's okay because we expected them to lose by about 15. So the home field advantage is only negative 2 points there because the Jets lost at home. So let's go back and do this calculation. Instead of saying both teams are equal, let's go back and use my NFL team ratings and recalculate what the home advantage should be. For NFL division games, I already talked about how the home and home structure naturally accounts for the strength of teams. So you should get roughly the same answer. And voila, in fact, you do. You get the exact same answer. Home field advantage in division games is 0.9 points. We also get the same answer for out-of-division games in the NFL. When you do this for college and you look at home field advantage in out-of-conference games, you get a drastically different answer. The home field advantage in out-of-conference games now is 3.5 points. This is significantly less than the 8.9 points that we estimated before when we assumed all teams were equal. So, accounting for how good teams are really does matter. In addition, there's evidence that using this better expectation based on my analytics is a good thing to do. Previously, when we assumed all teams were equal, the error in the estimate of out-of-conference games in college football was 0.7 points. Now that we are using a better estimate for how good teams are, the error in the estimate is 0.4 points. So we're almost cutting the error in half, and this is a good thing. Now, let's get back to figuring out what your advantage is due to rest. Let's start with the NFL, and we're going to take a recent sample, 2016 through 2021. Now, in the NFL, my estimate for advantage when you are coming off a bye playing a team that played last week is 0.3 points. So this is significantly less than the 0.7 value that we calculated before. Look, rest means almost nothing in the NFL. It isn't what it used to be, and, you'll be forgiven for assuming that there is no advantage due to rest at all. In college football, the results actually change quite a bit. When you're looking from 2016 to 2021, now I'm getting an estimate of 0.9 points, so almost a point due to rest. So when a team is coming off a bye week and they're playing a team that played last week, the advantage is about a point. And this is significantly more than the previous estimate, which was actually negative. So it seems like rest matters in college. And I wouldn't be surprised if this changes. I wouldn't be surprised if this value decreases in college sports as more of these college programs adopt the sports science principles that the NFL has adopted. So I know that was a lot, but let me leave you with 3 final conclusions from this work that I've done on home field and rest advantage. Number 1, home field is decreasing in both the NFL and college football. 3 points for home field is a relic of an earlier era. Please don't use that quantity. Number 2, home field is smaller in division games in the NFL than out of division games. We see a similar effect in college. Home field is less in conference games than it is in out-of-conference games. This is because teams tend to be more familiar with these opponents. Number 3, bye week advantage probably exists, but it's pretty small and it's hard to be statistically sure that it exists at all. It's been almost 2 seasons of football since I recorded that episode. However, the college football numbers haven't really changed. For conference games, I use a home field advantage of 2.4 points. For out-of-conference games, I use 3.5 points. When you have a team coming off a bye, playing a team that did not have a bye, in college football, I use 1.1 points. In college football, we have a bigger sample size, and that's the reason that those values really haven't changed much since I recorded this episode. We don't have as big a sample size in the NFL, and some of those values have changed. For division games, I use a home advantage of 1.3 points. For an out-of-division game, I use 2.2 points, which is pretty much about the same. The bye week advantage has changed. I now use 0.8 points. So that's a bigger value than what I used before. My code actually calculates these quantities dynamically every week. I use these parameters in my member football predictions. These are saved for paying members of the site. If you would like to learn more about becoming a member of the Power Rank, you can go check out thepowerrank.net. That is a URL that will take you to a place on my site where you can learn more about a membership to the Power Rank. My name is Ed Fang. I'm proud to be your host of the Football Analytics Show. I hope you enjoyed this episode about how I go about calculating home and rest advantage. I will talk to you again next week.